Thank you for tuning in to another Terrific Tips for Business, also known as Terrific Tips for Business. But I'm Terry Watkins, your host, and today we are here talking with Mr. John North. For those of you who don't know John, he is a 5-time #1 international best-selling author. Now, I know a whole bunch of you have been focused on writing your books, sharing your story, and doing all of these amazing things, and that's why I wanted John to join us on the show today. John North is a versatile and experienced entrepreneur with a solid background in accounting, banking, finance, personal development, IT, marketing, and business management. He's a pretty well-rounded guy and pretty down to earth, if I do say so myself, and I'm really thankful that he is here. John currently holds a number of titles, including CEO of Evolve Systems Group, Associate Diploma in Business Accounting, and Fellow of the Institute of Public Accountants. John's passion is to help business owners become more strategic and smarter about their marketing efforts. He consistently pushes the envelope of what's possible in the modern era and is widely regarded among his peers as a very innovative and highly creative in his approach. So please join me in welcoming Mr. John North to the conversation today. Thanks for being with us, John.
Thanks, Terry. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah. So you are tuning in from Australia today.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it's first thing in the morning, so I think it was like the time zones are all fun in America and Australia, but you need to figure it out sooner or later.
We sure do. I'm so glad that we got a chance to make this work. So grateful to have you here. And as we were talking, getting ready for this conversation, we were talking about your Evolve Entrepreneur and some of the groups that you have and some of the support that you provide, especially when it comes to the publishing world, because you've done quite a bit in that space.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of interesting because in some respects, I spoke to somebody the other day and said we've been involved in like 1,500 books.
Wow.
And so, and that's only in a space of 3 or 4 years. And I said, oh, we kind of do things fast. So, some people say, oh, I've been, 100 books took me 10 years or 20 years, but I think people do the same thing every year and they think they're getting better. But you know what I mean? Like it's just a repeat of the same thing. So we're always constantly improving. So over that 3 or 4 years, I reckon it's like 40 years worth of publishing, right? Because the stuff we've done in that period of time. So
that's incredible. So you must have a decent team of people that help you, because I can't imagine you can do that much with just one person.
No, not really. And contractors and ability. And I mean, a lot of those times, some of those books we were involved in, but didn't do a hell of a lot with. So not necessarily we printed them, but we might have been involved in formatting them or taking the bestseller status, or you know what I mean. So luckily we didn't do them all. So we probably did, probably about 100 books, 150 books that we actually had a hands-on approach to. But being involved in so many other books and seeing what happens is a much nicer way to be in terms of most what we call hybrid publishers, what we call ourselves, I guess, is that they only get involved in a small number of books, whereas we've seen a big range of them, and we're involved in a lot of communities about books, so we see a lot more than most people do.
Yeah, so that brings up an interesting question for me. Because you're in so many different communities doing so much with books, do you do a lot with a variety of types of books, like business books, personal development books, children's books? And what kind of has been a common thread amongst all of those different types of genres?
It's actually interesting because one of the first questions we ask an author is it a legacy or a logic book? Right. So if you put aside, say, fiction books, and that's a much different marketplace. We've probably done some children's books and some non-fiction stuff, or fiction stuff, but mostly non-fiction because it's easier. Because fiction needs a whole different approach to it. You've really got to build your own market and stuff like that. So at the end of the day, when we say legacy or logic, we say, are you writing a book about yourself and you want this to be a legacy of you about you? So it's more of an ego-driven thing. Or is it a logic book where you're actually imparting your knowledge? And invariably what we find is that people who write legacy books hardly ever finish them because they can't write about themselves. So they end up in a situation where if it's your first book and you want to write a book about you, try and push it into something about what you do and revolve you around the story rather than you being the story. And so we've always done that. So a lot of clients come to us and go, I want to write a book about my life. It's really interesting. I'll say, yes, but is it that interesting? Right?
But is
Right?
it
Are you that
really
interesting? Are you that interesting that you can write 40,000 words about you, right? And then they struggle with it. And so a lot of times I say, look, maybe your legacy book's your second book, not your first book. If you want to make a book for business, that you want a book around your business or a business around your book sort of thing, you want to be able a scenario where you've got to impart what you know. People don't really care about you until they know what you know, and then they'll care about them, right? So at the end of the day, it's very tough to start talking about yourself and then get away with them. And I've got one client that does that. We've done 4 books for him, and he wears a mohawk, and it's all about him. But he uses that as that's his marketing message. It's not ego. People might think it's ego, but it's not. Right? That's his way he does business. People get attracted to him because of that unusualness, right?
Sure.
And so yeah, you got to chuck your ego away when you write a book. If people write a book and they've got a big ego or very sensitive, then I'm sorry, you're going to cop it. People are going to complain about your cover. They're going to complain about what you've written. You're going to cop it. You put yourself out there. That's most people don't write books because they're too scared of what other people might think of them.
Ooh, the critic space is for real. That's really hard.
Yeah.
We as entrepreneurs think that the critic in our own head is hard. Imagine having somebody who seemingly can see inside your own headspace, and they're putting it out on paper for the world to see.
Yeah. Well, I always have a saying with clients: "What other people think about is none of your business." Right?
Yes, I've
and,
seen that
and,
one.
and and the other thing too is you haven't upset anybody by midday. You're not marketing hard enough.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I haven't heard that one. If you
Yeah.
haven't upset anybody by midday, you're not
Yeah.
marketing hard enough.
Yeah.
That explains a lot, John. Maybe I'm doing some things wrong.
There's a woman I follow in I can't even pronounce her name, so I don't even try. But I noticed her on Facebook, and she's about confrontation in that she comes up with things, and she's very out there, right? And she does a good job of it because what she's doing, she's upsets people all the time. She posts stuff, and then she knows she's going to upset them straight off from the get go. But she's got a big following because she knows that gets people moving, and other people don't disagree with them anyway. So to me,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Interesting. So it kind of is better to troll your network and be the one that's poking that bear instead of being the one that's like being
Defending it.
copacetic all the time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, she wrote a thing the other day. It was quite interesting. She said she doesn't get involved in defending. So she said and this is the thing we have to teach authors because once they've written their book, it's their baby, right? So it's almost like the very first thing first bad review they get, or the first time someone says something negative about them, they freak out. So it's got to harden them up first because they're going to be ready for it, right? So people write reviews on Amazon who've never read books. I'm sure of it. Sometimes you read these reviews and think, what did you do there? You on something at the time when you wrote that? What exactly is that all about, right? Because they haven't read the book, right? So you got to get a thick skin. And sometimes, as one guy said to me who does reviews, he said, one star reviews are good sometimes. He said it gives someone something to look at. He said, and also it raises their attention into what's this? Why is this a bad review? And so in some respects, it's not just a perfect thing. So the trouble with books is people think it's a perfect science when it's the most imperfect thing,
Interesting.
right? So what they try and do is they try and aim for perfection when they write a book,
Mhm.
right? And then that stuffs them up because they spend the rest of their time second guessing themselves for the entire period, and then eventually don't produce it or produce something that has become like a Frankenstein of things that other people thought of rather than them. Because
Interesting.
people said, oh, my friend read this book and he doesn't like it or whatever. And I said, well, did your friend buy it from you? He goes, no, he never would. And I said, well, why are you taking his opinion? If you've got a credit card, your opinion doesn't count.
Now I've heard that one before. Your
Mm.
opinion only counts if you pay me.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well-meaning friends are dangerous with books. That's the worst thing I see. Like, they've always got opinions about it and all this sort of stuff, and they give it to their friends to look at because they're looking for that kind of peer thing where they're saying, "Oh, the friend really liked it." Well, the
Uh-huh.
reality is their friends hardly ever run their business, right?
Right.
And so, unless they've got friends in the business, right, and then that's a different story because they're going to give them some good advice, mostly. But at the
I
end of the
think the
day,
same thing
yeah.
happens though with like our reality TV and our singers, right?
Mm.
People who are like the next top model or the next American Idol, concept. All of
Yeah.
these people who try out for this, their friends are like, oh, you got to try out. Your voice is amazing. Everybody needs to hear it. And they
Mm.
go and make a complete ass of themselves on stage. It's not
Yeah,
bad,
and their
but
friends think, "Oh, what a
actually,
great piece of TV!" I just said that's my friend making a fool of themselves.
hey, I know that guy.
Yeah, yeah. And so I
Yeah.
think it is scary, and the thing too with it is what I get a lot of, and I've just had these actual conversations with two or three authors recently because of this whole quarantine thing. People are in there writing books, as you said, right?
Yeah.
And they come to me and say, "I've written this book. I've done all the hard work." I go, "No, you haven't. You've done the easy work. Writing the book is the easy part, right? Because that's the fun bit, right? It's like building a
Supposed to
house,
be.
right?
I don't know.
Yeah,
It's been pretty challenging for me to write my book. Like,
and therefore, and that's an interesting thing because what we find is when people write the book, they don't have any strategy around the initial book, so they haven't thought about what the journey of what's going to be when someone reads it, what's the outcome at the other end, what are they going to use it for. All those questions don't get answered until they finish the book, and then they start thinking, well, I'll think about a cover, I'm going to think about a title, and all those sort of things. So we do it the other way around. We actually set up the title, the cover, and the table of contents and the whole book concept and strategy way before we write it.
interesting.
And most people do it the other way around. So when they come to you and they go, "I've written this fantastic book. I need you to help me publish it." I go, "Fantastic, but what?" You ask some questions and go, "Oh, I can't answer those questions." I go, "That's because you never thought about it in the start." So what's happened is you've now got a situation where you're trying to sell something that you actually wrote, like you wrote a legacy book. This is what we get a lot of. "I've written this great book about my life. I want you to help me sell it." And it's like, right. Is there any tips for anybody else to use? No. It's like, can they follow a journey with you afterwards? No. Is there you know what I mean? There's no follow up for that. And so what's happened is they've kind of done it the wrong way around because they think that when you watch a movie, it's written from scene to scene when it's not,
No, it's not.
right? They
It's
sometimes
usually
film the
written from the
ending.
back forward.
Yeah, all over the place sometimes, right?
Sometimes,
And
yeah.
so depending on opportunity, right? And so what happens is people think it's a perfect thing where you lay it out and you you open up the laptop and you write chapter one. So they sit there and they write chapter one, they start, and then they go any further than chapter one because they can't get past it. When they actually should have been written chapter 23 first, right? We always write the introductory chapters last because we find that because you've only got, I don't know, 2-3 pages before someone just says this book is rubbish, I'm not reading it.
That makes sense.
It's got to
See,
be the
John, I've
strongest
already learned
suggestion.
something new. I'm starting backwards.
Yeah, yeah, you got to start backwards. You got to work. It's they call it Tarantino, right? You show the end result, and then you work backwards to get there.
That makes sense. That makes
Mm.
sense. Well, and if we think about it as small business owners, that's really what we're doing with our business in general, too, right? Like,
Yeah.
we don't set out to get into business to just own our own job, most of us.
No.
Some of us have because we like the industry that we're in and we just don't want to answer to somebody else. Some of
Mm.
us start there. But if you talk to any good business coach or any good financial advisor, they're going to tell you what's your succession plan? What's the
Mm.
end? Like,
Mm. Mm.
what does that look like? What's going to be when's enough enough?
Yeah.
And what does that end look like? And if you don't plan for what that looks like now, you're never going to get there, or you're never even going to know if you're there. You might
Well,
already
even if you do get there, sometimes it's like the reason why you're selling your business is because of a health or financial problem. So you're actually the end result will come. Your business will end at some point. It's just whether it's your choice or theirs,
right.
right?
Yeah.
And yeah, and that's the trouble with the book. See, what happens is because you don't have a plan necessarily from the get go. What happens? You don't know when you're going to end the chapter, or when the book's going to end,
Yeah.
right? So it becomes like you start padding things out, or you start. I mean, the whole thing, trying to do it that way, it's almost like going to a place you've never been, and assuming that if you just follow the map, you'll get there. We're not recognizing anything along the way, right?
Right.
And so if it's a straight line, it's okay. But if it's all over the place, you're going to end up in a situation you're going to get lost along the way. And then you go, oh, hang on, I'll have to pull back on that. And that's, yeah. And the other thing with books too is people try to write books for everybody. So when I speak to someone who says, well, who's the book written for? They'll give me this list of age ranges and demographics or whatever, right? And the reality is that you write a book for one person. Like, and we say, and I was actually I was doing some marketing the other day, and it was a deep marketing scenario about how you look at your customer, your potential customer, and it said if you can't go out for dinner with them and know them intimately well, then you haven't got anywhere near what you should know about that person, right?
That's right.
So it's almost like you got to think about someone that you know so well that you know what they like, what they read, and you know them so well. So if you write a book about that, you know them well, they're going to get it, right? And the
That's true.
reality is people are similar. So at the end of the day, just because you wrote for one person doesn't mean it's not that only one person, but that type of person, that way they think, what they look at, becomes your methodology, and you connect with some one person, not everyone. Because when you write a book for everyone, you've written nothing to no one.
And that's the same that comes around for like the networking, right? So all
Mm.
of the business owners that are out there in the networking scene that say
Yep.
they're looking for anybody with this
A
problem.
pulse.
I don't know anybody with that problem. I certainly don't know everybody with that problem, but I know somebody with that problem. And so the
Yeah.
concept of writing for that somebody makes a
Mm.
lot of sense, because you're not
Mm.
eliminating people, because
No.
there's a lot of somebodies that fit into that somebody category.
Yeah.
So if we can identify who that somebody is and really know them, like you
Yep.
said, like know them well enough to know where they're hanging out, what kind of things do they read, what what interests them, what are their hobbies, where do they learn, what does their family look like? Those are all
Mm.
questions you should ask anyway, especially if you're a business owner. Those are all questions you should ask anyway. But when it comes to writing a book, having that clear image down,
Mm.
and that's a stumbling block, because if you don't have that, then you're right, you can be like rambling along, and before you know it, you're 5,000 words in, or
Mm.
5 chapters in, and you're like, I don't really know where one chapter starts or ends. I might be talking about myself here.
Yeah, it could be, yes, and it's pretty normal. Like, I wrote a book about. We decided to write a book about how to write a book, right? And I'll show you about that later. But the idea behind it is we started with the concept of what we call success paths. So one of the things I learned just recently, probably in the last year or so, was that when we're looking at course development, one of the things that really successful courses have is a success path. So you have, where are you now and where you're going to be,
Yeah.
and in along the way. And so what we've done with people is we've actually come up with a concept that when normally we do books, we look at their success path and we say, well, where are you and where do you need to go, or what are the steps to get there? So depending on what you're writing. So in our book, we put down 5 kind of key areas to focus on to get a book done. But it could be where you're moving from or moving to. And that gives you a roadmap to design the book around, because now you've got a blueprint. Now you've got a way of saying, okay, this is from the start to finish. I know where it's going to start. I know the middle and I know the end, right? Whereas opposed to, where am I going to end? And what am I going to leave out of the book, right? So a lot of times we say, look, what you leave out of the book is actually far more important than what you put in the book.
Yeah.
And so I put in my book, I put everything in except one thing that we left out, was how to get a bestseller properly, like to actually do it properly. We talk about it, but we don't actually tell you how. Step by step, because it'll be given the secret sauce out. But the
Right.
rest of it is in there. The entire process, everything I know because I wrote it, so I actually could finish off setting my project management up to help people write books. So I thought, well, I might as well write a book, and I've written the blueprint, right?
Well, and the beautiful thing about the way that you've done that, because this is your world, now you can
Mm.
use that book as training material
Yeah,
for your
yeah,
staff, so now they know how to do it. And you have to leave the piece out that's going to make them want to call you and say,
yeah,
okay, so now I need you to help me publish this book.
yeah. Because the
I want
reality
my
is,
book to be a
yeah,
bestseller, John, so
yeah, exactly. And the reality is too, if they're a good customer, they'll probably never read your book anyway, right? We have scenarios where if someone looks at your book and says, okay, it could be blank, and they'll still go ahead with it with you, because that's a credibility thing. They don't want to do it themselves. They just want to make sure that you knew what you were doing, right?
right.
And so some cases, your best customers aren't the ones that read your book or read the whole part of your book. But then again, people who read your book and then implement it are the best things. If someone comes to you and says, hey, I read your book and I made all this money, it's not like you feel like you're being left out of this. You feel like, wow, you got something out of it. I helped someone, right?
Right.
And actually, when I wrote that publishing book, my son started in the business with me, and I was creating a legacy for him in the business, so basically he could take the business over. But one of the things I did is I wrote the book in order to train him how to do publishing.
Nice.
So, and he actually got involved and helped write the book. So in the end of it, he actually learnt by writing the book, right?
We
And
learn by
so,
teaching others.
yeah, and that's the
Yeah.
best way to learn.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. And that's awesome that you get to have like a father-son team.
Mm.
In
Mm.
the States, we have a lot of husband-wife teams. So it's really
Yeah,
cool to have father-son teams or
yeah.
mother-daughter teams as well.
It's
That's
a
fun.
different dynamic
It
in some
is.
respects too. Yeah, and I mean it's a learning dynamic, and for him to learn how to do it. At the same time, we looked at it and said, oh, okay, well, it's another person's perspective when you're going through. Do you understand it? Because he was new; he's only just come out of school, so he's only like 19. So he didn't, if I didn't dumb it down and make it understandable for him, then how could a reader ever understand it?
Right.
And so it's a good litmus test of that. If you can't get someone to understand what the hell you're talking about, you got a problem. The other thing too, it takes probably about, we do a book in 90 days. So 90 to 180 days, you can write a good book, right?
Mm.
If you want to write a great book, it's probably going to take you 2 or 3 years,
Okay. So now I
right? No
don't
one
feel so
really
bad
reads a
that it's
great book.
taken me like months and months and months to
Yeah.
like work
And
through
the
it.
trouble is, yeah, because you're thinking through it, the trouble is with a great book, that is a really big subject that you're trying to deal with, right? And it's probably something that needs to be really comprehensively done. And so people try and write a great book to start. I think you should write a good book. Write a great book later when you get better at it,
Yeah,
because you don't usually
just
write for a living.
start. Just write one. Like start
Write a
with
book.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be huge, eh? Like you can get to a book like that, and the books at 10,000 words or less sell really well on Amazon. They're the most read books.
True.
So sometimes you can just get away with a small book to start with, right?
Okay.
Just depends on the market. Like I had a guy the other day. He said to me, I want to write like 40 books, and I want to do this, I want to do this." And so I wrote these little short books. And I'm going, "Do you know it takes harder? In some respects, it is harder to write a short book than a long book, right? Because you've got to take a lot out of it." But he wants to do lots of them, a series of them. I said, "Why are you doing this?" That's the best question in book marketing. Why are you doing this? And it's
Yeah.
like, I don't really know why I'm doing this, right? And so, well, I think what you got to think about is that maybe you write a better, smaller book. It could be 40,000 words, and then take your rest of that content and put it in a course or add value to the book, rather than trying to write 40 books. Because you
Right.
think by writing 40 books you're going to get a result that you're not, you know what I mean? So
Right.
you've got to kind of think about it, like, is a short book a good book? Like, if it's a short, I got a book on fixing bunions without surgery, right? It sells quite well. It's not a very long book. It's only about 120 pages long, right? It doesn't need to be any longer than that.
Sure.
And it works. It doesn't have to, a 400 page book. I mean, we just finished a 616 page book on natural birth.
That's a book. Holy
That's a
smokes. That's
book.
a textbook.
That's
Yeah.
right. It's a lethal weapon. You could,
For real. Yeah, especially if it's a hardcover.
yeah.
Duck.
Yeah. Massive book. It's a massive book.
Yeah.
But I went and actually looked at what to expect when you're expecting, and that's 656 pages long.
Okay.
So now you think about that, right? The market, in that market, expects a book like that to be that big,
True.
right? Because a woman who's pregnant will read that book, cover to
True.
cover, right?
Right.
But they're not going to read your book on how to market on Facebook for 656 pages. They're just not going to do it. They look at that and think, that's how many pages I've got to read to market on Facebook? I ain't doing it.
Yeah. Well, and I started backwards, and I think some entrepreneurs start backwards too. So I started with the course. So I have
Mm,
the course already done
good.
and have already walked through the course. I walked through a gold standard course and took a gold standard course on digital courses and how they're being used, and studied
Yep.
not just what they were teaching in the course, but how did they do it.
Yeah.
And I took the how did they do it and I applied it to mine and was like, okay, so this is what they implemented here, and they implemented this, and they did this, and I like these different components to it, and I want mine to have those pieces. So I put that together first. So now I have this course and I don't have the book, and I'm like, maybe I should do the book.
Yeah. Yeah, because you've got to. The other thing too with book two, it's a very wise man just told me recently that I didn't even realize, subconsciously you do stuff you don't realize you're doing it. Is that he said your book table of contents becomes your marketing plan for the next 12 months to 5 years. So what you should actually do is then look at your book and say, okay, chapter number 1, I'm going to do marketing for the whole month on that. I'm going to just talk about that subject, right? And so now that you've built that book, I mean, I had someone the other day that just finished the book, right? He's just literally, I'm sending him his final proofs. He hasn't even got them yet. Now he's thinking about writing another book, right? Great for me because I'll get more money out of him. And I looked at the bad for you, because the reality is you've just gone off in the pretty shiny syndrome. Because you took you so long, because he took quite a while to write this book because he struggled with it a bit. We just hang in there in the end. It took him about 12 months to get it done. And now he's in a situation where he's sick of it. He's tired of it, right?
Yeah.
No one knows about it, but he's sick of looking at it.
And he
So now
so
he wants to
badly
move
just
to the
wants to
next
do
thing.
something else.
Yeah, and that's the most dangerous thing that I see happen all the time is they put themselves through all this hell for God knows how long, and then they get a situation where they're sick of looking at it. They're sick of looking at the title, they're sick of looking at the cover, they're sick of talking about it. They're actually sick of it, and so they don't promote it ever again. It's like hidden away, and that's bananas. But it worked. That's what people do.
Right? That makes sense. And it makes sense because you have to do that for courses. You have to do that for everything. I mean, think about a
Mm,
service that a company offers, a
mm,
small
mm.
business that's going to offer some kind of service or a widget. You've got to be talking about the benefits of that widget for the next 6 months for people to
Mm.
realize what that widget does and why they need it,
Yeah,
especially if you're talking to the mass public, right? Um, or if you have a target audience and the target audience is your business to consumer business,
mm,
then you're going to have to talk about it for the next 6 months. So don't
mm.
get yourself involved in a business, a book, or a widget that you're going to
Yeah,
find boring in 6 months.
exactly. And that's the problem. Like you think about Uber, right? There's nothing very glamorous or exciting about someone picking you up and taking you somewhere. Right? That's all they've got to talk about.
Yeah.
That's all they've got to market,
Yeah.
right? Yet they find creative ways to do that, right?
True.
And so what happens is that's all their only products. So you look at the big successful businesses, they're the ones with usually one or two products. That's all they've got. But the reality is that's what they're focused on. So what happens is that's the problem with the books is that they write a book and then they forget that there's the marketing side is the most important part of it, not the book. The book's the easy part. It could be blank and you'd still get away with it. There is a blank book on Amazon. This is what men know about women. It's a whole blank book. Seriously. It's got reviews and everything, right? It's a blank book. And so, that was a pretty easy write. But the reality is that, but the reality is you can't, if you can't continue to market your books, you're going to have something interesting to talk about. You should, the guy that I spoke to about that is a pretty famous marketer. He's been around a long time. He said he's a dinosaur in the industry, right? And he said that, books should last you 5 years. You should be able to talk about that book for 5 years. You look at the E-Myth book, for example, that's been around 30 years,
And
right?
people still talk about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
people talk about buying about it. So the trouble with small business or entrepreneurs is they're pretty shiny syndrome. They get bored with stuff. That's why they didn't work for someone else because they got bored doing the same job every day. So now they're in an environment where they've got to do it. And so that's the problem. And so that's the great shame in some respects is sometimes we end up marking the book more than the client does because they're so sick of looking at it that they don't want to do it anymore.
Is there a tool? So I'm asking this question specifically because
Mm,
there have been several tools that have been recommended to
mm,
me over the years that will
mm,
help you because I particularly don't like sitting behind a computer. I
yep.
would much rather be out with people.
Mm,
Now, I like Zoom, and being able to do this podcast has given me the chance to be with people in a way that I otherwise am not
mm,
able to be because of everything
mm,
going on. But I generally do not like sitting behind a computer.
yep.
And so having to type it out is painful. I would much rather voice dictate it and then have it transcribed.
Yep.
So are there transcription tools that you recommend people maybe try? So then that way, because once you say it, it's out and now you're not thinking about it anymore. It's already done.
Yeah. And I think I've actually got a chapter on my book about rapid creation techniques, about things that you can correct content rapidly. Because one of these books I did this in 2 weeks. I wrote a 220-page book in 2 weeks because I already had all the content ready to rock. All I had to basically do was just pull it off from all the areas I needed to do, pull it together, and project manage it and finish it. Right.
Wow.
And so, because we've been building it a long time, that book has probably been in the making for 20 years, right? Because I've had all this material. But the trouble is that you're an author, not a writer, right?
Right.
Authors get paid quite a lot of money. Writers get paid very little.
True.
But why do you want to be a writer, right? Unless you want to be Harry Potter or write Harry Potter, not many people get that far. So, at the end of the day, it's a project management thing. That's where ego's got to go out the back door. So what we say to a lot of people is create the content. Yeah, like there's Trent, there's Revs, there's quite a lot of transcription type services on the market. It's not so much about the service you use, but it's the process you go through. So having those bites, and even Siri will do it. Like even Siri will actually translate. Got to be careful, Siri doesn't pick up on talking.
She's
Like
listening.
they
No.
listen to the conversation, and so getting that chunks of information down and not edit it, right? So just chuck it in there and then have a good editor. Like I got a brilliant editor. The one ones we use is really good. She's like this. She's brutal. Like she looks at a book and goes, "No, that's not good enough," or "That's crap," or whatever. She doesn't stuff around, right? She doesn't stroke the ego of the client. So that's why I keep her away from the client directly, because she doesn't stroke the ego of the client. Because it can't be. She can't be like that. She has to look at it scientifically and go, "This is rubbish, right? You've got to fix this up. This is boring," or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so what we do is we create the content and then let the editor clean it up, make the editor fix it up in their voice. So you don't lose your voice. But what I think they try and do is they try and write the book, and then they try to, well, create the book if you like, and then they try and write it. And the editor part, that's a skill that very few people have, and people who think they write well typically don't. We've had that before where they say, "I write really well." I've read it and it's like, right, okay. What do we talk about now? Because you don't write very well. Yeah, you write bad, right? And so I think that's the danger, is that you get in that you've got to do it all yourself. And I think that's the question you've got to ask yourself. Would you pay yourself to do this? And you probably say, no, I wouldn't. So there's editors and writers are a dime a dozen. Why? Because they don't make much money. That's why. They're not valued. It's like almost like this quarantine thing. Like people who suddenly got value were cleaners and security people and medical, and suddenly even politicians got more valuable, right?
Yeah.
Because suddenly there was things that were important, right? Suddenly the football stars and the TV stars were not very valuable.
Right.
Like they would have been first off the boat. They would have chucked them off the boat the first time if you had a choice, right? They're useless to me. Like entertainment later, right? And so
survival now.
Yeah, I need someone who can clean stuff. I need medical people, right?
Right.
And so you got to be careful that you don't end up trying to do it all yourself when the reality doesn't cost that much more to do it. And then you don't get sick of it. You're project managing. That's kind of what we do. We sort of say to most people, we can get a book done in 90 days because we're project managing you. We've got a vested interest in making it get it finished in a certain time scale. You don't. You can drag this thing out. You can second guess yourself. You can change your mind. You can go, oh no, I spoke to my friend and he doesn't like it, so I'm going to write it all over again. And then you can put it off for another couple of years, right?
Or you let your own self-doubt monkey get in the way like I do.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Listening to
like,
that voice.
You're on a roll for a while and you're like rocking away, and then out of nowhere you're like reading somebody else's book and you're like, oh crap, everything I've written is boring. Ugh, I don't like any of it.
Exactly. And it's an art form, right? So if you're going to build a house and you don't know how to build a house, you get a builder, right?
Right.
And I think that's the thing you'll be careful of, is that you've got to understand where your strengths are and what your superpowers are, and keep away from things you're not good at, and take ego off the table. Like that's the only thing I can say is most people I deal with that have problems in this process of the fact that they've got their ego or their self actualization or whatever in the way, and they've got to move past that. So sometimes a book can be a cleansing experience, right? It can actually be a great piece of personal development just by the fact you get it out of your system, and you apply what you want to say, and then get someone else to make it look nicer, make it look prettier. When we wrote a book just recently for a doctor, and an editor said to me, I can see how you were struggling to get something out of this guy, right? Because he wanted to talk about himself, and it was mildly interesting, but it wasn't that interesting. I said to him in the end, I said, you're not that interesting, dude. Like we've got to do something with this, right? And luckily he's not a big ego, so he was good. Like he took it on board. It's like, well, we need to give people help around this process of what you do, because your story is relevant to how you got there. We need to give people the tools to get there. So let's incorporate the story and the tools into one thing. Let's make it more interesting and more applicable to them, so they can see, oh yeah, I can see that he got there, and this is how he did it, and this is what you should do, right? And that become a 5 success path step of going from one place to another.
I think that's so good. So what you're saying really is, in order to really write an interesting book, you can't do it by yourself.
No, and most people don't.
You have to have somebody asking you the questions, because you could think you're being clear all day long. My husband tells me this all the time. You think you're clear. You think because you know what you're talking about. Other people don't live in your head, Terry. You have to explain to them to get them there so they can be on the same page as you. And I always think I'm being perfectly clear. Don't we all, though? And so having somebody come along beside us to say, that's probably not as clear as you think it is. What about this?
Well, the whole thing about messaging.
Yeah.
like millennials and whatever, they don't say hello, goodbye, right? So they just come into a conversation, go out of a conversation, it's fluid.
Right.
And then you go, and they start talking about something, you go, what? What? Oh, about, 3 weeks ago. And it's like, well, it's like, so them, it's a constant conversation,
Right.
right?
It never
For the older
stops.
generation, it's, you pick up the phone, hello, goodbye, right? There's a beginning, you know what I mean? And so the whole world is kind of like picks up in the middle of something and goes, did you know about this? Like, what? Right?
Oh, come on, John. You don't know how to like pick up in the middle of a conversation and keep on going? Sure you
I do, but you know what I mean? Like, sometimes it's like, but that used to annoy the hell out of me when I had 25 staff at one point, and probably 80% of them were below 25. And so what used to annoy the hell out of me was, they never come in and said hello, goodbye. So you didn't know when to finish the conversation, right? Are they gone? They've stopped responding now. Is that it? Right? Right? And it took a while for me to realise, well, hang on a minute, that's just the way it works. Right? And
Well,
that's the
because
trouble,
of
see?
text message technology and Facebook
Yeah,
Messenger, we don't need to say hello, goodbye anymore. We can
yeah,
like be mid conversation and put the phone down,
exactly.
go in the other
And so,
room, and then come back and be
exactly.
like, pick right up where you left off an hour and a half later or tomorrow.
The reason I say that is because when people write books, they think that people are going to read the book from cover to cover. So they agonise over the fact that on page 3, I'm going to talk about something I've talked on page 1, and they might miss it. I say, no, they're not. They're just going to pick your book up and start reading something random in your book. They're going to read your book differently what you think they're going to read your book. So one of the things that you notice in newspapers and magazines, more so newspapers, is that you can read a chapter, like a paragraph in a newspaper, and understand that chapter paragraph. So
True.
you don't have to read the rest of it to understand the story. So you don't have to read the entire story. You can read the first paragraph and the last paragraph and maybe one in the middle, and you've got it.
True.
So people think that by writing a book from end to end, that people are going to sit there and read page 1, page 2, page 3. They're not going to do that.
No, that's a good point. I guess we think that way because so many of us probably do read
Hmm.
books that way, certain books that way. I
Yeah.
know if I'm reading, I'm reading it every page. But I'm one of those people that needs the physical book, and I'm going to highlight the crap out of it and write on the sides, and like I'm
Hmm.
in the book. There's
Yeah.
nothing else happening. It's just the book.
Yeah.
But not everybody reads that way. That's interesting to think about because as I was walking through my process of starting to write my book,
Hmm.
I had that same thought. Like, I don't want to miss this. This is an important piece, and I need them to
Hmm.
understand this before we could get to that.
Yeah.
Somebody who picks up the book probably isn't going to read this. They're just going to jump to that because that's the part they want to know.
Yeah, because they want to get to the end, right? So
Right.
people read the last chapter, right? They flip to the back of the page, and so, and just recently, what we do in the back of our books now is that we have I'll show you that. So we put stuff in the back of the page at the back of the book because this is where they might flip to, and they might skip the entire thing.
Yeah.
So you got to think about the way they use your book and how you want them to use your book, right? So I always want to write one of these books where you actually based on what you choose in the book, you go to a different place in the book. So it almost creates your own adventure book, right? That takes a
I've
lot
read
of
those
work.
Goosebump books. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and that'd be really cool. But the reality is that for us, if we write a blueprint book where we've got 5 steps, then people will skip the first couple thinking they don't need them, right? And then what we say in the book is, did you do this? You go back to chapter 1 and do this. So you know that they're going to do it. So you cater for the fact they've got to do it. Or you put worksheets or Easter eggs or something inside the book for them to go and get something more so that you actually can control the conversation and you can, generate stuff. So that's another thing. People never put any Easter eggs or anything in their books. They kind of write the book and go, how do they get in touch with you? I didn't even put my domain name in the book. I forgot. I didn't even put contact details. How are they going to find you? They have to Google you. Like that, you're making them work, right?
And they're not going to do it. The reality is a confused mind doesn't buy. And the
Correct.
easier it is that we can make it for them to do the thing that we want them to do, whether buy the book, engage with us in social, whatever
Mm.
that is, the easier it is for them to do, the more likely they are to do it.
I'll give you 2 little snippets of advice that I come up with, all right?
Yeah.
One was, don't make it hard for people to pay you, all right? And I see that all the time, all right? In my business, I make the thing that I focus the most is so that people can pay you, right? Make
Right.
it really easy, right? And secondly, if you never have a $20,000 a year program, you'll never sell one. And so having that approach in your book thinking, well, if I could have something at the other end of this, what would it be? Do they consult with me? Is it a $20,000 program? They consult with me. Could I sell one book and make $20,000?
That would be cool.
That person I wrote to that I really wanted in the first place. Books have been written. I've got clients where they wrote a book for one person, wrote and published a complete book, sent them that book. They were head of a large hotel chain, and they wanted that person to read that book. And what they did is they sent copies to all the understaff underneath him, and then eventually they came to him with this book and said, "You've got to read this book. This is all about you." Right?
That's a brilliant
Wow.
marketing strategy, right?
$1 million strategy. It cost. I think they made 100 million out of it.
Oh, wow. Talk about really identifying and understanding your ideal customer and
Mm.
knowing how to speak their language so that they take the action that you want. That's
Yeah.
incredible. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I want to be very respectful of your time. I realize that it is your Saturday morning as we're recording this. So, with that said, my last question for you this time, because I know there's so much more we could talk about, and I kind of want to have you on the show again to talk
Mm.
about Evolvepreneur. But right now, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you? Because you've dropped some really great knowledge for us. And I know somebody listening to this has written the book and now they're scratching their head with all the questions that you've asked saying, oh, maybe I need to talk to John. So how can they do that?
Okay, so step number one was we wrote a book about how to write a book, right? So, and then the reason I wrote that was so I didn't have to have those conversations necessarily at the start point, right? Train them up a bit. We actually wrote it as also to help people, actually implement for our clients. So that book's available on Amazon, I think pretty cheaply. Sometimes it's only 99 cents depending on what we're doing. Physical, and we sell reasonable copies of that. And at the back of the book, there's a little section here called the, I'll see if I should get this done, cover my head up, is the secret publishing kit, which we give them, which is like a checklist and all sorts of stuff to actually complement the book.
Nice.
And so this book becomes like a blueprint for writing a book in some respects, right? So you can see, okay, and what have you done? How have you done this? What do we do here? Like, for example, we've done success paths in the book, for example. So let me see if I can find something here that's going to be easy to find quick. I got to find it now. Lost it in here somewhere. Here we go. Like this sort of thing, right? We've got a success path.
Gotcha.
Right. And so we want to enable them to say, okay, where am I going? What am I doing? So I think probably the easiest way is to probably go and get, book publishing secrets for entrepreneurs. I've got a website, johnnorth.com.au, which is basically my personal website, which has got all my books on there. So it's probably the best place to start there, because then you can see, if you like to play squash, well, I wrote a book on squash. So, and we're currently writing a new book called Startup Secrets for Entrepreneurs as well. So, basically kind of keeping on with the secrets concept.
I love it. And we all love to have the insider scoop. We want to know the answers to the secrets because we want to feel like we hold power that other people don't have because we've had that secret. So I love that you're playing off of the secret game and letting us in on the publishing secrets that, as entrepreneurs, as small business owners, or as somebody who works for somebody else who thinks they just have a good story to share, they don't know what those secrets are. And we need to know what they are in order for us to win with our books and our publishing process.
Exactly.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John, for being here. And I'm not kidding. I want to have you on the show again because we need to talk about Evolvepreneur a little bit.
Yes, that's a big thing coming for us, and yeah, pretty amazing kind of thing. That's probably what I'm trying to spend most of my time on at the moment, trying to stop writing books.
Well, I appreciate you sharing so many words of wisdom about the book writing process, tools to help us not be the author, or rather tools to help us be the author and not the writer and not the editor, because we can't be our own editor. We do have to have somebody else with that process.
Yeah, please don't edit your own book. Please don't proofread your own book.
It's painful. You don't want to do that. You end up putting things in there you didn't mean to, or taking things out that really are important that you want to have in there. So
Yep.
Phenomenal. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. And I hope that everybody takes the time to reach out to you who is thinking about writing a book before they start writing, because you could save them a lot of time.
For sure.